story this Saturday. The Libyan Health Ministry claims at least 114 people were killed in the first 4 days of the coalition's week-long series of airstrikes. The report comes as NATO gears up to replace the U.S. in leading the campaign aimed at protecting civilians. RT's Paula Sleer is in the capital, Tripoli, and now joins us live. Hi there, Paula. What is Libya and the capital waking up to this Saturday morning?
Well, Anissa, let me just start by saying it was quite difficult getting here to this live position. A woman has just stormed into the hotel where we're staying. She's crying hysterically. She says that she has just escaped from prison where she was badly beaten by Gaddafi's men. Now, we have been hearing stories like this for the last 2-3 weeks, but it is quite unusual that someone's actually been able to have access to the foreign media. We now understand that the security is trying to take her away so that we will not have direct access to her story. So no doubt I'll bring you more of that later in the day. But in terms of what is happening in the city itself, in the early hours of today, Saturday, there were 3 explosions that were heard in and around the suburbs. The coalition Air Force insists that it is targeting important destinations, important targets of Gaddafi's Air Force. For the 3rd straight night, the suburb of Tajura was hit. Now, I was there a few hours ago and we drove past a radar installation building that is still smoldering. We know also that the town of Zintan, which is 160 kilometers to the east of Tripoli, was also hit in these airstrikes, as well as the town of Ajdabiya. Now, what we're hearing from there, and this is a town that is 160 kilometers away from Benghazi, which is the rebel stronghold in the east, we are hearing from the rebel fighters themselves that for the first time they have entered Ajdabiya from the eastern part of the city, and that for the first time they're able to take on Gaddafi's forces and are pushing them back. Whether or not this is true remains to be seen, but if it is true, it marks a turnaround in the fighting on the ground, because it was just this time last week that Gaddafi's forces were on the perimeter of Benghazi, threatening the people there with what we were being told was a massacre. The health ministry here in Tripoli has held a brief press conference. It says that in the first 4 days of fighting, 114 people were killed, 445 people were wounded. But the health ministry is unable to tell us just what percentage of those people were civilians and what percentage were fighters. But we're hearing from rebels in that vicinity of Ajdabiya that as they advance forward, they are coming across civilian bodies in the road. Many of them are women and children. But again, it's not clear whether those people have been killed in airstrikes or whether they've been killed by Gaddafi's forces. Now, the government insists that at least 100 of the people that it claims have been killed in these airstrikes are civilians. But it's proving very difficult for them to actually show this to us. I attended a mass funeral. Of course, there it's impossible to verify who was inside the more than 30 coffins that were brought out. I visited a farmyard where there were 2 people suffering from shrapnel, from missile attacks. There too, it seemed a very small number compared to the claims that are being put forward from the government. But state television here is certainly reporting that dozens of innocent civilians have been killed in these coalition airstrikes. Now, the American military says that in the last 24 hours, it has fired 16 Tomahawk cruise missiles and 153 air sorties have flown over Libya. Again, it is insisting that the target is strategic targets of Gaddafi, his artillery, his mechanized forces, and his command and control infrastructure. Qatari aircraft, for the first time, is now part of this international operation. Now, the U.S. President Barack Obama has said that the operation is a success. He says that they have significantly reduced Gaddafi's air capability and pushed back his ground forces. But a very different story coming from the Libyan leader himself. In fact, he has now gone on record praising his fighters, saying that he will advance them, he will reward them for their heroic efforts against the Crusader enemies.
All right, that as on Sunday, NATO is set to take over command of the operation. What's the attitude towards this switch? What are you hearing on the ground there about that?
Well, for most rebel fighters, it doesn't really matter who is in command of the international airstrikes. Essentially, they want more airstrikes and they want more weapons. But among the leadership, they understand that when you have some 28 NATO countries now calling the shots, it will be a little bit more difficult to get a more robust action on the ground, that you always run the risk of one of those countries actually vetoing an operation. So we are hearing some kind of concern, particularly among the leadership within the opposition. But having said that, though, we do understand that come Sunday night, NATO will now be in command of the no-fly operation in terms of implementing that. There still needs to be a decision made in terms of who will have overall command of this operation. We are hearing voices of concern, particularly from France and other countries who would rather that NATO did not actually take control. So we need to see in terms of what happens with that. And we're also hearing from the African Union. Now, they have been meeting and they say that they are planning to have talks between rebels and the government. They want to facilitate these talks and they want to help end the war. The rebels say that there's simply no way that they'll meet with Gaddafi, that nothing short of him actually stepping down from power and not being on the political stage is something that they will accept, but it might change the situation on the international front. You might see some countries reconsidering how this international operation in Libya moves forward if indeed Gaddafi, which is what we're hearing, and again we can't confirm that, we're hearing that he is prepared to make some kind of concessions. If indeed this turns out to be true, the international community will have a new set of questions in terms of how it wants to move forward.
RT's Paula Sleer bringing us the latest on the situation in conflict-torn Libya from the capital, Tripoli. Now, concerns are growing that the U.S.-led intervention is only worsening the humanitarian crisis. According to the UN, around 300,000 refugees have already fled Libya, with many more on the way. Our correspondent Igor Pskinov is observing the exodus across the border with Egypt.
So far, the humanitarian situation hasn't really improved much. Tens of thousands of people are continuing to flee Libya each day, looking for safety and better living conditions. The main flow of the refugees is on Libya's western border with Tunisia, but many people are going to Egypt as well. We met this family. They were from Benghazi. They said that the humanitarian situation in the city is critical at the moment. They were saying how they're not actually fleeing because their home has been destroyed. They just don't feel safe there anymore, and said that they were going to wait out here in Egypt and see what's going on there, maybe come back when things settle down. When it comes to Egypt, actually, many towns and cities near the Egyptian-Libyan border, security has been really strengthened there. Also, there have been changes on the Egyptian-Libyan border itself. If we hear that just several weeks ago, it was patrolled basically only by Egyptian border guards who were people who were letting people in and out of the country. Now it's being patrolled by both sides. There are representatives of the so-called national police in Libya who are also checking documents of the people that are going through the border. So maybe the opposition is gaining some more control over the situation and perhaps just some plain discipline. But judging by these figures and the tens of thousands of refugees each day, and in total, according to the UN, over 300,000 people have already fled Libya. The situation hasn't improved much, and the goal of the whole military operation by the alliance, which was to improve the lives of ordinary people and make it safer for ordinary people to live there at the moment in Libya, that still has not been changed, unfortunately.
We can follow our correspondent's first-hand experiences in Libya on Twitter.